Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so thrilled today to be joined by Morgan Holmstrom to talk all about her series SkyMed. And I love the fact that the creator of the show, Julie Puckrin, kind of has described it as Top Gun meets Grey's Anatomy, and it very much does have elements of both of those worlds. And I know that you've kind of grown up a really big fan of a lot of medical drama procedures as well. And so when you first started shaping your character for this series, how did that idea of genre and the world of medical dramas that you knew this was going to be part of the echelon of influence the way that you were thinking about character and some of the beats that come into shows like that in terms of the tone and the voice of a series?
Yeah, so that's a great question. With medical shows, I feel like the stakes are always so incredibly high. It really is life and death for pretty much every scenario that you're in. And it has that fun new aspect to it because you have aviation, you have flying on top of that. So that's just another kind of level that's added onto the show. And I feel like that's something that makes it, very unique in the scope of medical shows, is that you can add that aspect to it. And I feel like for my character of Crystal, when I first read the script, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like there's flights involved. I didn't know too much about flight nurses. I only knew about, nurses in regular hospitals because, my dad works in the medical field. So I did a lot of research in that way to kind of just get an idea of what their lives are like. And I watched probably a million YouTube videos, whatever I could find, to get a sense of what their life would be like in those scenarios. And because you are in remote communities, you are in the Canadian North. It's not the same as living in the city of what we're used to. And there's a hospital that's accessible to you. So I think I tried to, find all of those aspects that I could draw from for my character of Crystal, and just come to make sure that I'm coming from a sense of true knowing for her. Obviously, for any character you want to do that, but yeah, that's kind of what I tried to do with Crystal. Tried to touch on all those medical aspects, tried to understand her deep personal life. And we also got a lot of training with it as well. They took us up in a plane. They gave us medical training too. So I felt very lucky that I had that going into it as well.
And with a lot of that research that you were just mentioning in terms of flight nurses and a lot of the specificity that comes with that, living and being in more remote spaces, having less resources, what were some of the personality aspects that you brought into Crystal as a character through understanding that lifestyle, what would be driving her into that field in the first place, what it is that she really thrives upon, given how high stress it is and how the stakes are even higher because it's not, like you said, a hospital in the middle of a city with all of the resources around you?
Yeah, so I feel like for Crystal, she lives up north. So that's her community, that's her hometown. So all of her friends, all of her family, her life is up there. That's where she feels the most at peace and at home. So I feel like when she's in these scenarios, she's thriving in the sense that it's all so deeply personal to her, and she's going to all of these calls understanding that these are people that are close to home, and it's her community that she's taking care of, the communities around her. So I feel like kind of building that in and realizing that Crystal, she's the one that's kind of the veteran of the group. She's been around a little bit longer than everyone else, and I feel like that ties in as well, as she wants to, she's kind of like the tough cookie. If you have met other nurses who've been around a long time, they don't take any shit, like they will, if someone is not doing their job, they will tell you. And I kind of wanted to make sure I was drawing on that for Crystal, because I admire that about nurses who have been around the longest, is that they're so passionate. They've been around, they've seen it all, and they just want to do the job the best that they can. So I feel like that's where I was trying to take Crystal, and kind of how you see that relationship unfold with Haley as well in the show and all that kind of stuff.
And obviously Haley coming in as someone new, Crystal at the beginning is very reticent. And there's that moment where she's basically saying, you know, so many people like this come up here. They don't really know what they're stepping into. They don't know what our world is. And a lot of them don't stay. They end up leaving. And so you get that sense that some of it's self-preservation for her as well. Like, I'm not going to take the time to get to know you unless I know you're sticking around. And then maybe I'll start to let my guard down. And so did you see some of the elements of that initial friction and distance that Crystal's creating, not necessarily being about intentionally keeping people at arm's length because of that's her personality, but a little bit of it being self-preservation of where she's directing her energy and creating new relationships and new friendships?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think, you know, yeah, Haley is coming in as this new flight nurse. We don't know her yet. We don't know what she's about. And in the beginning of the show, you see that kind of big hiccup that happens on the plane. And I think that's just, you know, oh, we're doing this again. There's going to be another nurse who doesn't take it seriously and yada, 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 labor and delivery, whatever, all this stuff. And I think Crystal's just more like, you need to earn your stripes. You know, she'll look at you and she'll read you. And if you're not living up to what she thinks of or what she believes in, then she'll kind of move on and wait a little bit, see if you prove. You kind of have to prove yourself to her. And, you know, I love that about Crystal, that you have to kind of earn her love a little bit. She's that tough love. And you kind of see that with everybody in the show. She's kind of like a mama bear. She'll put you in your place if you need to be. But it's all out of love, I feel, for her. And it comes from a place of caring. And even though it may not look like that sometimes, I feel like it is a deep sense of just wanting the best for people. So, yeah.
Right. And with that toughness in the way that she shows affection, it's not that she's going to necessarily express herself out loud and say certain things to people, but there's kind of quiet ways that she expresses it in her own individual way, or particularly through actions that she'll make in terms of the protectiveness. So she does love incredibly fiercely and incredibly loyally. And so how did you set about finding the dynamic of the way that she's expressing it when it's not through kind of traditional dialogue delivery of telling someone out loud, but these much quieter, smaller actions that she's making towards people?
Yeah, I just, you know, going into any sort of character, I try to, what I like to do is write down kind of everything about their life and everything that, very little details of, you know, specific memories, whether that's, you know, her dad or her ex or whatever. So whenever you're in those moments, you can kind of draw upon those, and it's almost like you're remembering it as if it's your own memory. So that's what I like to do. So then in those situations, when it's not extremely physical, it's all very internal, and it feels like it's kind of bubbling underneath. It's kind of simmering right above the surface. So, you know, if it's a look to somebody, or if it's a, you know, in episode, I think it's like 5, when we're in the wilderness and like the guys are kind of going at each other. It's like, okay, stop. You know, it's kind of this bubbling, this, you know, always about to peek out, but not quite, you know, keeping the lid on it. So I feel like that's what kind of helps me to kind of not be so physical in that sense. It just kind of keep those emotions and feel those emotions, hopefully, through the screen in that way. Yeah.
And with going through some of those details as well, you know, obviously sounds like it's a myriad of the details that you had from the scripts, and then details that you're envisioning and creating beyond the page. And obviously when you're working in episodic, you don't have all of the scripts at once. The show is still being written as you're going into production and as you're starting to encompass this character. And so how much of those details did you have? Because there are a lot of inklings that we start to get episode by episode, like when we first meet her ex for the first time, or when someone's talking about her rebellious streak when she was younger. And so we get to kind of see a lot of windows into different sides of who she is. And especially, like you said, because of the closeness to her community from her childhood as well in the scripts coming forth.
Yeah, so like you said, like we didn't get all the scripts right away. Probably we got two at a time, I believe, for each block. So, and when I was talking with the creator, Julie, I knew kind of where they wanted to take Crystal. So I had an understanding of where we were going at least. But I didn't know all of the full details going along. So it was which is kind of nice because you're kind of uncovering it as you're going along and you're not kind of playing out the outcome. You're just kind of living in the moment as you see it happening. So, and that's kind of how I like to go about things in general for acting. Some people do, but I personally don't like to get too ahead of the script before my character knows those moments, because I feel like I just want to uncover it while they're uncovering it. So I tried to keep it, as we're going along, and I kept track of what scenes were in order, and I had like a little book of all my notes and kept it. Okay, so this happened, because you're usually shooting out of order. So for all of those scenarios, I had my notes to look back on and stuff. But yeah.
And with details that you had the chance to talk to Julie about, or that she was able to kind of give you a little more insight in, was any of that in regards to the way that we do get to kind of see this gradual softness and vulnerability and a lot more of the internal aspects of Crystal as we go episode by episode, with those kind of guardrails and walls starting to break down a little bit more?
Yeah, when I talked with Julie, that's kind of a big theme that she wanted to go with is, one of the major themes of the show is we take care of our own. And I think as the show progresses, that's kind of what you see for Crystal. All the layers start to peel off, and you see that it's all coming from a sense of care, a sense of, wanting to take care of the people around her. And I feel like you see that for all the relationships with her, even for, Emma, and the bigger one was with Haley. And I know that for the show with Julie, before I even did the callback, she called me and she was like, for the show, the big relationship we want to see is Haley and Crystal kind of being, and this final kind of friendship that you see forming throughout the show. So I feel like that's kind of where we saw Crystal going. That's where I knew we needed to end up. So I tried to kind of play within the episodes a little bit of trying to let her walls down and peel back the orange, as you say, or whatever. And yeah.
And with the idea of kind of gradually taking away some of those layers, when you were building Crystal at the beginning, knowing that was kind of a big part of her arc throughout the season, was it about creating first the aspect of who is she as a person with these guardrails, and then what does it look like if we peel these layers away, or kind of who is she without these guardrails, and then building that up around her, or a little bit of space in between those two?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, a space in between, because I personally, I like to look at the character and kind of see the root of where it all comes from first. And you can always know, like, okay, you can always kind of sense with a character, like, okay, she has her guard up because of this, she's being tough and putting up a facade because of this. Like, you can kind of understand that a little bit. And I knew going into the show that, Crystal's Kokam, her grandma, is a prominent elder, so she has to live up to all these expectations, and she has to be a bit of a perfectionist, and she can't make a mistake. Like, there's so much stakes for her in that sense. And, perfectionism is a defense mechanism as well for people in general. So I feel like it was adding all of those layers, understanding the root of where that all comes from, her sense of belonging, her sense of family, her community, and then building upon that, understanding all the nuances between that and stuff.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you're bringing up that perfectionism and just that immense pressure that she puts on herself to make everything perfect, because that's also something that she projects onto other people. You know, when Haley comes in, it's like, this is the standard we're all working at, and you need to reach this, because that's what she's holding herself to. And so what were some of the aspects that you found within her where it was kind of a projection to other people, and things that she's bringing into these relationship dynamics that are really actually very much about her relationship with herself in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think we all know people in our lives that are projecting their own feelings onto other people. And I feel like, yeah, Crystal is dealing with that, perfectionism. She is dealing with that needing to not make a mistake, needing to not go back to her past, not lead back to that dark place that she was once in, with Jeremy when she was younger. We all make stupid mistakes when we're younger, and I feel like she's very hard on herself in those situations. And she definitely projects it the most onto Haley throughout the show. And I feel she starts to almost come to peace with that. It's almost like Haley brings out that, she starts to recognize that they're more similar than she thinks, and everyone's running away from something in the show, or having to deal with something in that moment, that's very challenging. And I feel, the writers did a phenomenal job, I feel, of giving us these full character arcs within this medical drama that has so much going on, that you can still relate to these characters, and still have aspects that everyone can relate to and draw from for everybody. So, yeah.
And because of what you were just saying in the writing as well, it also gives you this great opportunity to kind of almost create the different versions of her as a character as well. Like, who is she professionally? Who is she, when she goes home at night, but also is living in this house with all of her colleagues? So some of that workplace stuff travels over. And then who is she when she's back in her community, or around her childhood ex, or someone that she's known since she was a kid, who just knows certain things about her, and, has kind of this language where they can speak without words in different ways. And so how did you find those nuances in your performance, or Crystal as a character, where you had these slightly different ways that you would play her based on when she's out in the field professionally versus against, maybe when she's around someone from her childhood in that way?
Yes, I think for all of those different scenarios, there's even just seeing that scene in what was it, episode 2, I think, with her childhood friend, and being like, oh, don't bring those things up, please, in front of my crush. Like, it's all of these, whenever you're put into these different scenarios, you're just like, who knows the most about me? Who doesn't? Like, everyone always has a wall up in real life too, and you kind of cater to the people around you, and you kind of put up a different I feel like you cater to different scenarios all the time, and you kind of become a different person with different humans in your life in general. So I feel like for Crystal, building in those scenarios where she did have all of that history with her ex, and having to have those harder conversations with him, and he does know everything about you, and it just brings more stakes, I'd say, in those sense. That's like the common, I guess, word for the show, is all the stakes. But her and Jeremy have all this history together, and I feel like it kind of speaks for itself in those scenarios. And then at the crew house, everyone is living there. You're all blowing off steam. You're all kind of coming back to the same area, and you're kind of just forced to lean on each other in those scenarios. You have to just create your own little family, and families don't always get along sometimes. And you see that push and pull dynamic kind of play out throughout the show with everybody. But at the end of the day, we all come back together and realize that you have to take care of your own family. So I feel like that's kind of for Crystal. She goes into these scenarios understanding all of the roots of those situations, but realizing that there's a bigger picture to all of that. And you do have to lean on each other at the end of the day.
Yeah. And in going back in talking a little bit more about some of the training that went into this role as well, I wanted to talk specifically about some of the on-set medical training. I've heard you talk about a guy who you call by Medical Steve, who was a great resource in terms of working with you on specific scenes and the rest of the cast, you know, the day before or right before going into a scene. And so what were some of the really important elements just in terms of, okay, this, you know, this is how I'm going to handle this piece of equipment. This is how I'm going to move around someone as I'm trying to diagnose them, or, you know, this is the way I'm going to approach them with equipment, or kind of feel out the situation that really came into play in a lot of those scenes and a lot of those moments. Because at the end of the day, it is a medical drama. And so there are a lot of those moments episode by episode, and they're all very different in what they ask of you.
Yeah, I think for that, I put on a lot of pressure to make sure that the scenes looked like it was something that you would do in the medical field. I mean, that's the hardest part about, I feel, medical dramas in general, is that these are, you know, careers of people that if you kind of mess up and you do something off like these, you can be called out right away. And I really wanted to make sure that before going into these scenes that I had at least a good base understanding of what was entailed. And, you know, Medical Steve was great for helping with us with that. And he was our onset EMT. And so before our scenes, anything that had a medical aspect to it, he was there with us. He was watching the screens and calling out if something was being done improperly, or, you know, there would be some sort of cross-contamination in that sense, or, you know, wear her gloves, those kinds of things, like making sure that it all it all made sense for those medical scenes. And but we didn't have too much time. That's the thing about these shows. It's very quick paced, it's happening very fast. So before these scenes, I tried to do research on what the procedures would be beforehand. And like, luckily YouTube is a great resource, and you can look up really anything on there, whether that be like a tracheotomy or, you know, putting in an IV. I watched so many videos on how to put in an IV, and how to set up all of the equipment. And then when it's put in front of you, you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? Because there's just so many different parts to it. So Steve, he actually gave us a little kit to bring home, with a tourniquet and everything. And my partner was staying with me, and I was like, I'm going to practice on you. You have no say in the matter. I am going to do an IV on you and see if I can get through it. So it was kind of things like that. I did a bunch of practice with those things. We did a lot of IVs in the show. And we tried to make it look like it would out in the field. Like Steve was telling us that he had a little clip on his shoulder so he could hang an IV bag. And there's people, so because you need to hang it from a higher point of the IV. And that's when in the pilot, you'll see me put it on the windshield of the plane. I hang it up there. I put it on my shoulder. Like, these are kind of things that Steve was saying you would do in these sort of scenarios. So yeah, we tried to pull all those aspects and do it in fun ways too.
I love that. And also want to talk a little bit about costumes and accessories for Crystal as a character, because there's so many great details interlaced. And how did details like that help you really figure out aspects of her personality and her characteristics, given, you know, when you look at her costumes and when you look at the things that she's wearing as a form of self-expression as a character?
Yeah. So, you know, at the beginning of the show, we were just kind of figuring out who our characters are. And like, I knew that she lived up north, so I didn't want it to be too extra. I wanted it to feel kind of like, you know, small town and not too extravagant. And I feel like maybe at the beginning of the show, we put in a lot more accessories, and then we toned it down throughout, because we are in northern Canada, and and it's not super glamorous or anything. So I wanted to have like just regular old jeans and, just our work boots and things that would make her feel just more grounded to that land and to that character. But I did want to bring in like our costume team was amazing. And anything that I brought up to them, they were so willing to collaborate. And that was a great, amazing aspect of that. And I wanted to, bring in some Indigenous artists into the show. And like Indie City creates these amazing earrings. So I told them, hey, like for the scene with Dr. Trevor, they're going on a date. Maybe we can bring that in. And it's so cool that you can see that being played into the show, because I know these are brands that people really love, and I see people wearing them all the time. So it's really cool that I could, ask and receive that. So, but yeah, I feel like for building a character, when you step into those clothing, these types of clothes, it kind of gives you a sense of who they are. And once you put on your flight suit, you're like, okay, it's go time, it's work time, and you're ready to go. And it gives you, it's kind of like that finishing touch, that little sprinkle dust that, puts it all together. So yeah, that was a great part of it.
I love all those sorts of details, and really appreciate you sharing all of this detail in terms of the first season. Congratulations on everything with the show so far. And thank you so much, Morgan.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.